Hello everyone, welcome to a new video. This is a bit of a different case than I usually do. Typically I cover the banner review before the Tempestral GHB tier list update. However, this unit in particular has so many misconceptions about how good she is that people are actually considering following her, which would be nothing but a mistake. So I decided to actually, go ahead and do the Tempestral / GHB tier list first. Now, I did say that I had like manual machining 3 times this week. Today was the first day, so but I've already worked on the banner review and the Brunnya tier list on Tuesday. They're both basically ready, so I'm going to just be recording this one tonight, and tomorrow I'll be recording the banner review. So for those who are looking forward to the banner review, just know that it's coming. Just tomorrow. I wanted to really cover this unit before she came out, so just to avoid people wasting her for res smoke. Anyway, let's look at her stats, shall we? So, Brunnya comes in with DB3 and res smoke. Res smoke is absolutely not worth killing her for, however. I'm saying this in advance, just so you understand. Now, the reason why she is so good, her stat line is, first off, really good. A lot of people give her flack for the stat line, but realize how easy it is to set up Fimble Velter, how easy it is to have just one less point than full HP. Remember Sealed Falchion? It's still a good weapon. It has the same requirement, except this can also work at full HP for any penalty received. So debuffs, threatens, panic, flash, and so on. However, the wording is a bit strange, because it's like, if penalty is active on foe, neutralize penalties, right? Penalties only refers to stat penalties. If you get flashed, for example, that is not getting rid of. Same thing with panic. Panic is not gone. It's just because it's now a debuff. The debuff itself is cleansed from this weapon, but you don't get to keep your buffs. Still, you're completely immune to debuff with this weapon, to put it simply. Whatever kind of stat loss you can take, completely immune to it. That means chills. Well, if you have enough stats if you have enough of the stat and you get chilled in it, well, you basically took it for your team and it did nothing to you. Which is one of the things that makes her really good. Another thing that she can soak in are shrines and AR. In fact, in AR, I'm going to say this as a bold statement, but it will make a lot more sense later. I consider Brunnya a better unit, at least for offensive AR, than Aversa. And another thing that she has in bonus to Aversa is that she's good in every mode. Aversa is kind of like pretty solid in AR. In Arena, she can be a bit shaky, and everywhere else is, why the fuck would you use her? Though she has a decent stat line, so you can actually substitute a weapon for a different one, like Rather Fox, for example. But that's getting off topic. Still, overall, I do think Brunnya would be better overall. So, for the first merge, this is pretty simple. It's kind of unfortunate that she does not get a point in speed instead of res, but her res is still fairly solid, and even if you're dealing with a plus 10 Surtur, if she is plus 10 herself, or not even if the Surtur is plus 10 and has flowers, and I think you're like at something as low as plus 3 or plus 4, you can literally just shut down, or rather ploy him, I guess would be the best way to put it. Her weapon is essentially Idune's weapon, which I'm not sure if they tried to do something cute of a reference, because Zephiel ends up basically giving Idune for safekeeping to Brunnya before fighting Roy, and Idune has literally the same weapon as Brunnya, except Brunnya is a caster. And another thing that of note about Brunnya is the fact that being a caster is overall better than Idun. Idun is solid, don't get me wrong, but the one movement is really annoying to use, though she can really make herself a living fortress that just is really difficult to take down. But while I do say this, she falls into the I have only one movement unless I'm babysitted by a different unit, or I run armored boots, which is only good for like until the first fight, and is literally counterproductive to her weapon. Armor Killers kills me, which is super common at this point since they decide to slap this on every pref in and their mother. She's also weak to Dragon Killers, which are also fairly common nowadays. So there's that as an issue, whereas Brunnya is an infantry unit which only has Poison Dagger as a weakness, and nothing else. I guess she's also weak to Kitty Paddle. Oh boy, very dangerous weapon. I think you're getting to you understand where I'm coming from. And also Idun has another issue, and that's the fact that if she is not debuffed, she needs to take damage. And a lot of the best Idun set makes her so bulky that she actually struggles taking damage. That's not a problem with Brunnya, though she can become extremely bulky, and that's actually one of her biggest plus. Which is really good, because casters in general, just put it this way, you know Fury Desperation, the thing everyone uses? Yeah, well, Brunnya can actually use that especially well because she basically gets a 7 across the board because of Fury. Since you take 1 damage and your weapon is up. Now, obviously Fury is not the best option for her, but this is still worth mentioning, and Fury is really good on lower merges. Higher merges, you'll probably go for something a lot more hefty because you won't need the speed nearly as much. Now, let's talk comparison. The units I've picked are a bit strange, but give it a moment, okay? First off, Delphia. I guess I'll also add a bit to why she's only A+ on the tier list, because once you'll see Brunnya's rank, you'll kind of just probably jump the gun on that one. It's the fact that she does nothing new. To put it simply, she hits hard, and she's quick. Cool. That's literally every blue tomes. I glossed over this before, but to put it simply, as like simplified as I can. Yes, Delphia can use sturdy blow, or sturdy impact, sorry. And with her tome, that's 3840. Cool. See, here's the thing, however. Her stat line is nothing new. I believe she has something like 19 def and 28 res, and her weapon pushes that to 31. Look, I can name you like, well actually, let's just put a percentage on it. 70% of the blue tome caster have this type of stat line. It is nothing new. As depressing as it is to say, what she brings to the table is nothing new. Ishtar with attack plus gets to very similar stats, except she gets a cooldown -1 on the weapon, and she can use sturdy impact just as well, if not better, because of it. Whereas Delphia with Desperation would be locked into Ruptured Sky. You can use Luna, for example, on Ishtar. Or if you run Flashing Blade, you can run AoEs. Ophelia is also very potent, able to run AoEs or instant proc of like Dragon Fang, and such skills. And you want to know the problem? Every, like 90% of the blue mage caster ends up with something like 14 to 19 defense and 25 to 29 res. Give or take. Since most of them ends up having the same bulk, and most of them are focused in both attack and speed, but mostly speed, like Ishtar with 36, Delphia with, I believe, 34, I'm counting the first merge, giving her speed. Or Teltio, I think she's at 35. Loot, is at 32, but her weapon pushes it to 35 anyway, and you should not be switching weapon anyway. Unless Blarfox becomes a thing, in which case that could become a thing, depending on what you want to do with her. That's kind of the issue. Blue Mage tends to be all attack and speed, no death, and too little rest to ploy, which really hurts them. Now Julia, for example, now jumping to Julia, is attack and res, but her speed is fairly iffy. And if you look at this and you're like, but Brunnya has 36 speed and Julia has 36 speed. Need I remind you that Fimble Velter gives 4 speed, meaning that if you combo this into a speed buff, you have 46 speed, meaning you don't have to rely on a B skill on top of typically supports or an A skill buffing your speed like Swift Sparrow, which basically limits your options. You can't really run Sturdy Impact, for example, on Julia, because she just doesn't have the speed to really double effectively, which is what makes her super dangerous. So you're stuck running, you know, Swift Sparrow 3 instead, which means you lose 10 death, which hurts your bulk overall, and kind of makes Light and Dark kind of shaky overall, which, that's another thing. Honestly, the effect of negating buffs, just put that on the weapon. The fact that it's split across the board mean that she's either running the B skill or has, you know, nothing unique to her, which means you could run Special Spiral on her, and I guess she would be somewhat decent with AoEs to some extent. Which, okay, if you run something like Heavy Blade, this would work quite decently, like Heavy Blade 4, since that's now out. She would struggle getting herself started, but she would be decent after that. But then you lose Light and Dark, and Ophelia can do that much easier, so... Brunnya, on the other hand, well, she has her B slot open. She can run Special Spiral, she can run No See Disrupt, No Follow-Up, she can run all of the infantry, like, skills in the B skill, including lull skills, which does half of what Julia does anyway, which is going to be ever more prevalent once I get two Brunnya sets. So, Brunnya ends up having more speed and is more consistent at doubling, which essentially enables more option in your A skill. It's not reliant on the B skill being your pref skill that makes you unique, so that also opens the B skill a lot more. You can change the B skill in Julia, you can. It's just, at that point, just use a Blade Tome. Because at that point, if you use a Blade Tome, unless you have to deal with another Julia or a Deirdre, and to some extent low skill users, you will outdo what you're doing with Virtuous Naga, since all it does is 28 attack and 6 res. So, yeah, this is, to put it simply, this is kind of why I did not want to really recommend building Delphia, since she does nothing new. She would just get power crept by the newest Blue Mage that is basically doing the same stat line, but with more stats in Gen 4. It's kind of sad, but it is the case, and Brunnya actually outdoes Delphia just because of her weapon. Yes, both of their weapon gives 4 across the board, but Delphia has a recoil on her weapon, which is extremely annoying to deal with, and locks you away from tanking options, and that really hurts. Brunnya's condition is especially easy to fulfill. She doesn't have the type of bulk that makes her invincible, so getting to the second condition is easy enough. And again, if that's not the case, all you need to do is to get hit by debuff, which are extremely frequent. In most of the more dangerous PvE content, I'm looking, for example, at LHB, MHBs. She is also very good in Arena, because chill seals are very common, or B skill, because typically B skills are not really good at helping your unit, outside of chill skills, of course. And to some extent link skills, but you can't really run anything but Future Vision at a high level, so that's still out of the equation. So chills are fairly common, and Brunnya has so much res and her attack is also not bad at all, to a point where she will typically be the one targeted by a chill. Obviously you don't want her to be paired up with a unit like Rid, because Rid has too much attack, so you'd be the one to get chilled. Unless, of course, it's a bonus unit. Not bonus unit, or rather, it's still a cheerleader, rather. But yeah, overall, that's very easy to at least take the attack and res debuff off of your cheerleaded unit? Bonus unit, I guess? So that's extremely helpful already. And her HP is no slouch either. If you're doing AR from an offensive standpoint, and you're really hardcore on it, you'll typically be having 2 airs on the team anyway, which means that your HP is already pushed down to 58. Which means, if anything, even if, say, you're reliant on something like Gale Force or anything of the sort with an infantry team comp, you can also just decide to run Infantry Pulse. You have enough HP for it. It's honestly quite disgusting in so many ways how much you can do with her. But, you know, the other unit, and that's the actual one that gives her a bit of competition, is Loot. Now, Loot gets also 4 across the board. She has less bulk overall, of course. And she has 1 more attack. But her HP is a lot lesser, which means that getting panicked by a Versa is a lot more consistent. Even if you only have 1 air, Brunnya hits 53 HP, or 1 Naga also. Especially Naga, she's really good on Astra because she actually likes the defense. But, to put it simply, if you combo her into Naga or Air, she'll have 53 health, which means that Aversa on defense typically has 54, 55, 56 HP. 56 would still be too much. But, other than that, you will just not get hit by Aversa whatsoever. Which is kind of nice because getting your buffs panicked still hurts you, which is something Loot can't really do. Another thing is that Loot on lower merges is kind of not great, because her res is still kind of too low to really function. This is with plus 10 in Dragon Flowers, so she has only 34 res otherwise. You can use Fury and it will work to some extent, but you only sabotage unit with 34 res or less, which it can be a bit iffy overall. Whereas Brunnya ends up with 37 res? Yeah, 37 res on the first merge already. And that's without Fury, so she can actually, ironically enough, run Sabotage better than Loot. So, yeah. It's definitely a lot to take in. But let's talk about builds now, shall we? So, honestly, she can run so many skills. The first set with Sturdy Impact and low attack speed. This is one of the set that I really wanted to point out because this is why I consider Julia actually kind of worse than Brunnya. If you run low attack speed 3, do you want to know how much the enemy can do to actually buff their unit against you? You are immune to debuff, they can't buff their attack, they can't buff their speed, all they have left they can buff is def and res, and using drives for buffs. That's all they can do to influence the battle. Which makes it extremely annoying to have to deal with her, because she ends up having so much bulk with this set that if she doesn't kill you, she lives. And if she lives, she typically, if you are like built to do damage, she typically will have just enough HP to get dance and then snipe a different unit on defense. That alone makes her fairly solid, and it's one of the things Delphia could do. It's just that Brunnya does it better. And with low attack speed, your speed, You think 31 doesn't look good, but Fimble Velter gives 4 speed, and then low attack speed removes 3 speed on the enemy side. So you're at 48 speed, and the enemy cannot buff their speed. They cannot debuff your speed either. So yeah, the only thing they can do is panic you to get rid of your speed buff, essentially, and that's it. That's all they can do. Other than this, Brunnya is basically immune from like most thing that can be done to her, as far as on the defense side. Honestly, I didn't calculate this, but I think she can also deal with tanking a hit from Brave Ike, depending on the situation, which is disgusting. Like, and I'm counting Aether here. And since Ike won't be able to double whatsoever, if she can take the one hit, like with, for example, if you have whatever that comes out, the Anima or Dark Hero that buffs up her death by 5 and HP by 5, I'm about 90% sure that she could actually face tank a Brave Ike at that point, despite Aether. Because again, Ike loses all of his attack buff. The only buff in attack he can get are drives. Your death is basically immune, and you'd be looking at... You're already at 48 death right now, and if you have any kind of debuff on you, you're at 52 death. That's kind of disgusting, isn't it? So if you have a unit like, say, a mythic hero buffing you for 5 death and HP, you're at 52 health with 57 defense. Taking a hit doesn't look that impossible anymore, does it? It's, again, disgusting just how good her stat line is. It would not work if it wasn't for Fimble Velter, I will say that, but Fimble Velter just opens so many avenues, it's kind of ridiculous. Again, she can use ploys. Any ploys can work. If you want to have more bulk through attack ploy, that's fine. If you want to have more damage with rest ploy, that's also fine. I just kind of wish they would hurry up and add rest ploy to the 3 to 4 star pool already, since we're still lacking that. It's still 5-star locked. But, you know, if anything, you can still use attack ploy. Obviously, if you're using Ruptured Sky with this, you don't want attack ploy, you would rather want rest ploy. If you go attack ploy, you will rather have Moonbow instead, and besides, if you're using her in defense in AR anyway, Moonbow is typically better. Yes, a lot of tanks are beasts, but they also tend to have like 50 defense, or 50 res, I suppose. If not more, which means Moonbow does 15 extra damage, Ruptured Sky is hard-pressed to catch up, and, well, it will catch up the second that you have to deal with beast units. But while it will catch up with beast unit, everything else, you're kind of screwed. Because you lose a lot of damage running Ruptured Sky over Moonbow at that point. And besides, even in Arena, it's the same shtick for the most part. Moonbow will do just fine. Ruptured Sky is a bit more premium, but it comes down to, I suppose, preference. If you use her in AR offense, Ruptured Sky will typically be not needed, as in if you're dealing with dragons, you typically have Naga able to buffer. And if you're dealing with beast units, that one is a bit more shaky, but outside of Kanga, she should be just fine dealing with those. The other set on the right is a more damage-driven set. Obviously, this is a set that's more set around getting hit and then proccing. This set... Oh, and also, just to tally up the stats for the people that are curious. With the set on the left, she ends up with 74 attack and 48 speed. And her def res are 48 def and 50 res. If she ploys the enemy's attack, that's 53 def and 55 res. This is a mage. This is a free unit. And on top of all this, she is immune to debuffs. That is just disgusting. No matter how you look at it, This is simply disgusting. The set on the right is a bit more on the, I don't want to say on the budget side, because Special Spiral is a bit expensive. But it's a lot cheaper to go for, and obviously if you don't have Special Spiral, you can run Desperation instead. It works fine. It works just fine. If you run Desperation, however, no, Iceberg should be fine. You'll still proc it every 2 fights, so you should be fine. Now, 31 def, 47 res, yeah? Because of double brazen attack def, well, you're looking at 45, 47. And you get 14 attack. This stat line ends up hitting 78 attack and 45 speed, which is why you would want to run Speed Ploy, especially on lower merges. Another thing you can do is just run Fury 3 instead of a Brazen Attack Def as the A skill. If you just run Desperation, this might even be better. You will hit 48 speed as a result, which is 1 point above the better number. Of course, well, the better number, the magic number as I like to call it. Of course, Fury 4 would be better, but it comes down to preference, really. The Fury 4 in general is also really good for her, but that's going to be for the 5th build I'm going to be showcasing. Yes, 5th. There is 5 sets in total. The last one is, well, you'll see. So essentially, with this stat line, she ends up with 78 attack and 45 speed. That is ridiculous. To put it in perspective, you are hitting with basically a Blade Tome. You're hitting with very similar stats to Julia, but with a speed stat. And because you have a speed stat, again, like I said before when I compared her to Julia, you can actually make your def stat work. And because you can make your def stat work, you have essentially very little weakness. Again, our weapon is super easy to proc. So, at that point, makes it super easy to take full advantage of this stat line. As for the bulk here, well, you're still looking at 49 def and... yeah, 49 def and 51 res. Actually, let me recalculate for Brunnya. 45, 47, 48, 50. The tome pushes that to 50... yeah, 52, 54... 52, 54. Yeah, I forgot to add Fimble Velter. So in reality, the set on the left has 52 def, 54 res. And if you have attack ploy hitting on the enemy, you hit 57 def and 59 res. When your caster hits almost 60 def and res, on top of having a very sizable attack and speed, you know you have a really strong-ass unit. You know, the ironic part about this, though, is the fact that if Julia ended up having, instead of 6 attack, 6 res, 4 attack, 4 speed, 4 def, 4 res, she'd be able to run this. To some extent, to a very similar extent to Brunnya. Unfortunately, fate was not so kind to her, but it's still worth mentioning. But yeah. A Special Spiral Iceberg for enemy phase mostly is not to your taste. Obviously, Desperation works just as fine. Really, she can run so many things, it's ridiculous. Now for the second bunch of sets, Infantry Hexblade. That's again support that she can provide, in case you didn't realize this. Yet more options for her, I suppose. Now, Close Counter. Close Counter is a bit weird, but it works fine. After all, her weapon and attack def bond pushes her def to 40. Again. Very good bulk. This bulk is deceptive, and that's something that Delphia could not run. Close Counter set, she could definitely get to the same extent of stats than Brunnya on a Close Counter set, but the recoil was hurting every bit of use it had. And that's kind of the shame about it, really. Because of this, she kind of just doesn't really work all that well. She's very straightforward. You can really do one thing with her and that's it. Which is kind of ironic, because the one thing she's doing, well, whenever Blarfox becomes a thing, everyone can do it. Having 4 across the board, Delphia gets that, essentially. Or any user of Blarfox, except Blarfox can be refined. So, even if you refine it to res, which, by the way, is what Def gives, you end up getting a net boost of 2 HP. That's how bad the pref is. And you lose the recoil, but you can't do the enemy phase with it. But then again, you couldn't really do the enemy phase anyway because of the recoil. So, yikes. Here, Brunnya can definitely do it. And again, she's immune to debuff, which means if you get sabotaged, it doesn't matter. You can basically just say, yeah, it's fine. I don't care. As a matter of fact, if you have to deal with sabotage skills, it might even be in your favor, which is kind of disgusting in a way. Not that I mind. But yeah, this set, the set on the left, is basically you get hit back, proc Ruptured Sky. You can also run null follow-up with this set if you prefer the to block stuff such as Bolt Fighter from happening in the first place. It works just fine. This set essentially ends up on 69 attack, nice. 45 speed, so 69. Wait, no, 69, 48. So already there you have a fairly sizable attack, and on top of this, Thimble Velter and Attack Def Bond as well as low attack speed pushes your bulk to 43. So you have 43 def and 54 res. That's not bad. Even if dragons hit your def, it doesn't matter, because at that point your def is still very solid. And the best part about this is that if you do focus on making a unit work with this set with her, since her def is lower than her res, you can do something like double spurs. Because of bonds, you have to have someone next to you. Because of infantry hexblade, you have to have someone next to you. So say the other unit has, for example, spur attack def twice. Well, that's not exactly a seal yet, but I guess you can use spur attack def and spur def res. Your def just jumps up by 6. And if you have an ally support, that's 8. So your 43 def is now jumping to 51. And that's something that virtually any unit supported to her can do. 51 def is fairly solid, and at that point, well, taking damage is difficult. The only issue is that if you're reliant on the second effect of her weapon, which requires her to not be at full HP, it can be a bit awkward to run something like Noontime or Aether, because you might push yourself back to full as a result. Still, again, debuffs are far from uncommon, so it might work. It's the kind of thing that you have to basically test and see how much you like it. If you really have the support unit to help Brunnya, and by the way, for those who have seen my Enos, this is basically what I do with Brave Ike, but for Enos. So it's the same kind of logic here. Except you can also have Infantry Hexblade, which makes Brave Ike, if Brave Ike is the, the assist unit, quite solid overall, hitting the lower stat of the two. Obviously, if, he ends up having to deal with a tank, like a def tank, and he ends up hitting the res instead, that's a juicer heal from Aether. So definitely worth mentioning. But yeah, overall she can be fairly bulky. You just basically need to have maybe the person next to her buffing the def twice with spurs. And if you really don't want to use spurs and instead run drives, that's perfectly fine. You can, well, at least on the unit that buffs, that's perfectly fine. You can just use Marv, and with ally support, that's 9 def. Or if you want to use Yato instead, it would be 11. Again, there's a lot of ways to synergize with this unit to a point that it's almost ridiculous. The other set is a variation on, of course, the set I've showed before with double Brazen Attack Def. This is obviously a better set for enemy phasing, but it's also a bit iffy because you lose low attack speed, meaning your enemies can now buff their attack and speed. Still, it's fairly solid overall, and, well, while not perfect in the level of bulk, can still be salvaged somewhat by using, you know, again, a buffer. Since, of course, her attack is good, her speed is good, her res is good, the only stat that she's really missing is def. And if you're using Marth, for example, as your buffing unit, well, you get the 2 speed you miss for the 47 speed anyway, from the weapon. And Marth will synergize with everyone on the team, unlike Brave Lucina in this case. This is kind of why I consider Marth to be almost on the same level as Brave Lucina, because then you get unit like Brunnya that works really, really well with something like Marth giving that extra push that Brave Lucina just can't give. Of course, Brave Lucina will be better than Marth in certain cases, but the opposite is certainly real. Anyway, moving on to the third set, which is a fairly simple one. This is a more supportive set if you don't want her to basically be fighting. You want to increase her stat as much as possible, and this is super good if you are running like double Naga. It's a bit awkward though, because there's 5 spots, and one of them is typically a dancer, 2 of them are basically Nagas, and then you're stuck with 2 doing the work. So it can be a bit iffy, but essentially you end up with a unit with 64, 45, 45, 51, and 57 health. So getting Panic is really difficult. At this point only Panic, like level 5 or 6 Panic Mainer, whichever it is that is 60 HP, I think it's 5, to panic you. Aversa is never at that point going to be panicking you. She just doesn't have enough HP on defense. Even if you have something like an anima unit blessing you, it's rare. So that's kind of ridiculous in a way. So at that point you have so much def, res, speed, and attack that the shrines will typically hit Brunnya and no one else. And so will chills, which means your entire team is free of debuffs. Let that sink in. You're free of debuffs. You're basically trivializing an entire mechanic at that point. And obviously you can put flowers on this to make this even more consistent. Obviously also our res is 45. Failing to ploy with 45 res is really difficult. So there's that. You can use ploy. Sabotage are also still consistent, because you're sabotaging anything with 42 res or less, which is basically 90% of the game at this point. And of course, Fimbul Velter makes you immune to debuffs anyway. So even if she attracts all the debuff of the map, she's not useless, because she doesn't care about those debuffs. As a matter of fact, it only serves to make her stronger. So yeah. So to recapitulate our strong point, she essentially has a stat line that's a very strong all-rounder. Her bulk in defense is very, very easy to push to the point where you just end up having so much def that it doesn't matter with sturdy impact and sturdy blow, making it very difficult for you to die in general. Your speed is solid enough because of Fimbul Velter. Even at low merge it works because you just have to run Fury 3 instead. Have you noticed something about all the sets I've showcased? Outside of the last one, which has Fury for a different reason than speed, none of them runs Fury. Which means at that point, if your unit is, I believe, +2, you can hit all those stats with Fury 3. And if she's unmerged, or +1, Fury 4 can basically make you hit all those stats. The only one that's a bit awkward is if you don't have low attack speed, which is one of the better skill for her. But even then, 45 speed tends to be fairly solid, and you can just combo into a unit that would provide you speed. Especially once we start getting Astra or Mythic hero, well, Astra or Mythic, Mythic offensive hero that gives speed. At that point, well, you can just use that in Brunnya as her one issue fixed up. Or you can also give her Summoner support, which again makes it harder for her to get panicked. More stat across the board, which makes it easier for her to get chilled, and so on and so forth. Honestly, like I said, you have so many options with this girl. So she basically soaks all the chills for you, she's immune to debuff, she has a really good stat line overall. Her weapon's great. She can basically trivialize getting debuffed on top of nullifying buffs in the 2 key stat your enemies have at the same time, something that even Brunnya can't do. Actually, no, she can kind of do this, but it's like she has to use a bond skill to make that work, and that's inconsistent at best. And just overall a fairly solid unit. Honestly, the best way to compare her to Reversa, and that's mainly the main thing that made me realize I'm not going to put her in S, but rather in S+. Yes, I did make her in S+ hero, as you can see here. The reason why she's in S+ is because she has... How can I say this? Reversa has a 1 utility. It's a really good utility, and she's also the fact that she's a red flyer, which are still rare to this day for some reason. Those 2 things makes her really good, and she's a good Surtur counter with Axebreaker. Okay, that is pretty solid. However, Brunnya has a very unique perk of just getting rid of all debuffs, which is a thing that's unique to her in Idun. And as I mentioned before, Idun has too many weaknesses, and one movement tends to be just a drawback, and an annoying one to deal with at that. Idun can work with a speed set with Special Fighter, but while it is possible to make her work, it typically will require you to spend quite a bit of orbs, which, unless you like Idun, which honestly, at first I was saying she was not great, but she only aged better and better as time went on, and now she's actually one of the better armored units in general. I mean, she can be good, and if you like her, I would say she would be a good investment. But while I do say that, it's still a lot of orbs, whereas Brunnya is going to be free. 2,700 grails, for those who don't know, is 7 months of AR, if you're in tier 21, and that's if you don't try. Averaging 80 grail per week. I'm just counting also 40 grail per month because of forging bonds. You get 2,680 grails in 7 months, essentially. So then, by the next season, if you just basically get the grail at the middle of it, you have all the grails you need. And 80 grails, if you're in tier 21 per week, is a joke. And I'm not trying an AR, and I can hit this. The hardest part is hitting tier 21. But yeah, Brunnya has so much utility, and a lot of them is unique. And also, I will say, units that can do similar with just ploying and being a good offensive unit, in blue, there is Brunnya, there is Loot, there is May to some extent, and I think there was one more, but I don't remember which one it is. And ironically enough, as weird as that is for me to say, remember Delphia? May is kind of better than Delphia. That's a hot take, but to put it simply, they hit very similar attack and speed number. They can both use 30 impact to a very similar extent, except May also brings ploy utility. Not sabotage though, because her res is a bit too low for that. But she also brings a link skill in her weapon. That's a lot of utility in one unit. Obviously, I do consider Odin to be overall the better unit of the two, but that's still really solid. But yeah, overall, Aversa, while she has one niche, as a fighter, outside of dealing with Surtur, she doesn't tend to be doing too great. She can do fine, but the fact that you have to sacrifice your A slot and C slot for HP skills, typically HP attack and HP speed, means that you lose so much firepower that you tend to be pretty average or bad even when you have to deal with any kind of battling. Whereas Brunnya can actually fight very well and to an absurd amount, because not only does she have more tools than Aversa, her stat line is just that good. So, yeah, and since there is next to no competition for the kind of thing that Brunnya can do, Brunnya actually stands to be unique. And even if they add new units, unless they had this kind of pref to said unit, that niche is going to remain. The fact that you can soak chills for your tank, because one of the most annoying thing to deal with is chill def, chill res, but also the shrine that debuffs def and res. Chill def is rarely used, but the shrine that debuffs def and res is constantly used. Because of it, you tend to not be able to tank with your tank. But since Brunnya would take it for you, well, that's pretty solid. Now, it's not consistent for every tank, but a tank like Brave Ike, the Shrine will never hit Brave Ike. It will always hit Brunnya if you run Fury on her. And Brave Ike is a very consistent tank that a lot of people use for very good reasons, so definitely worth mentioning. So this is why I consider her to be the second best unit. I say the second best unit for GHB Tempest Trial unit because Eliwood is just insane as a combat unit. But I will say, as far as utility goes, on top of being a good fighter, I'd say Brunnya might be the best GHB/Tempest Trial unit we've got of all time. And that is saying a lot, because Eliwood was at the top of my list for the longest time. So yeah, all that to say, please, don't be an idiot to fodder her for a skill you'll hardly ever use, especially for dragons that typically will hit death for ranged units anyway. Just saying. But yeah, in conclusion, Brunnya is absolutely worth merging, and even if you don't plan on plus 10ing her, I would say making her a +1 is almost a must. I don't say that about a whole lot of unit. The last time I said this was, I believe, Grail's Devoted Titania as a Blade Tome for AA. Because, believe it or not, Red Mage Cavs are super rare. We got Erica, Titania, Leo, and I think that's kind of it. 3 Red Mage Cav. Fucking 3. So that's why I was saying people should be merging her, because her first merge I believe was attack and speed, which is pretty solid for a Blade Tome. But Brunnya is on a whole new level even. And this is why I really would suggest you to actually at least +1 her. She is well worth it. At least that's the way I see it. If you disagree, that's fine. I mean, we can be civil about this. I'm just saying that, in general, it's a waste to sacrifice her. Res Smoke also will probably become a 3 to 4 star unit C scale one more 3 to 4 star unit gets added. I mean, Speed Smoke was added to the 4-star pool. What's stopping them to use Res Smoke next? I'm still waiting for Resploy, but you know. As you do. Well, I think that's about all I have to say, and this video is already long enough as is. This is a 49-minute about one character. But there was a lot of information to go through, just because at the end of the day, Blue Mage Infantry is one of the most overpolluted pools, so explaining why she demarks herself from the competition is almost required to do. At least one, the unit actually demarks itself, unlike something like Delphia, which is why I went on a far more elaborate one. Because, again, a lot of people underestimate the hell out of this unit. And I wouldn't want to have people, at least people that do watch me, end up, you know, sacrificing a copy and then being like, wait, she's that good? So, you know. But I think that's enough. I'm gonna call it here, and I'll see you tomorrow for the banner review. Have a good one, everyone. See ya.